confident of reaching the destination before 6 o'clock today?
Yes.
That's good. I like some early confidence.
Yeah, no, it's going the wrong way. So what are we doing?
Okay, so it's day one, going up the mountain. This is the biggest day, so if we make this, then it's all going to be good. We've got a bit of a late start because the breakfast came with the hotel at 8 o'clock. So, you know, hopefully we'll still get there in time.
It was the first day of our attempt to walk the Tour de Dents Blanches, a 44-kilometre long mountain loop trail in the Swiss and French Alps. But our walk started from the Swiss town of Champery, located 6.5 kilometres away from the actual Dent Blanches trail.
We're about 450 metres up. How do you reckon it's going so far? How's the walk?
It's not too bad. It's hot and sunny. Well, it's not actually that hot. It's quite a nice temperature.
So it's about half an hour from here till we actually start the trail. So all this effort so far doesn't count. That's just to actually get us on to the Tour de Dents Blanches. So, you know, we're dedicated. We're doing 2 extra hours from the town to the start of the trail. This is the official start of the trail. 5 days from now, we'll be walking back past that hut. Hopefully, as long as nothing goes disastrously wrong, right? So this is the junction. That way is Champery. That way is the way that we're going back. That way is the way that we're going to be in 5 days. And this way is where we're going now. And I reckon we've got 4 hours to get to the top. It's really, really high up, but don't worry, we're prepared.
Our decision to start from Champery added 11 kilometres to our walk distance. This meant that our walk was a total of 57 kilometres long. We had given ourselves 5 days to complete it. The first day of the 5 was from Champery to the Cabane de Sustenance, a distance of around 14 kilometres. We walked via the Cantine de Barmas, which was a bit of a detour. This was not because we wanted coffee and cake, but because we wanted to make sure that we didn't miss any of the official Tour de Dents Blanches trail. And we knew that we would have to walk this section either at the start of the walk or at the end of the walk. We had booked beds in mountain refuges at the end of each day, and the Cabane de Sustenance would be our first one.
Here we are. We're about an hour and 40 minutes away from our destination of today, which is the Sustenance hut. It's going pretty well so far. It's coming up to 2 o'clock. We haven't had lunch yet because Tom insisted that we have a blueberry pie on the way up because he can't help himself. We had a coffee as well because this is the civilized Alps. We thought we were closer to the Sustenance than we really were. We thought we were only an hour and a half, but now it's still an hour 45. And there's lots of runners on the trail, which is a bit strange, but there seems to be some kind of race.
Some of the terrain on day 1 was a little trickier than we had anticipated and involved some steep climbs with chains for support. What we didn't realise was that the worst was yet to come. Today, though, the difficult terrain was minimal, and we made good steady progress towards the Cabane de Sustenance. At times, we even managed to do some sightseeing.
We're on our way to the Cabane de Sustenance. We're probably 50 minutes away. It's about 3:30, so we're kind of in the middle of backcountry now, late in the day, with a nice place to stay up the mountain.
Day 1 was now nearly over, and as we got closer to the hut, we could feel ourselves tiring a bit in the heat. Finally, the hut came into view, and we had successfully completed our first day. The Sustenance was built way back in 1932 and has capacity for 71 people. Fortunately for us, it was only half full, and as darkness descended, it had a tranquil atmosphere. The next day, we left bright and early, but we were still the last to leave the hut.
So we've just left the cabane Sustenance, the first refuge we've ever stayed in 20 plus years of doing this. It was Swiss, so it was super organised. They allocated us a bed and a table to eat dinner at and breakfast at, and we sat on an English speaking table with 2 Dutch people and 2 English people who live locally. We had rice and lentil curry, which I wasn't expecting, but it was very good. It was very comfortable. It was a bit hot in the night. There was lots of people coming and going because the toilet's kind of outside, but it was a good experience, and we got a free pin. The sleeping area was what we would call intimate, but luckily the hut wasn't like really busy, so it was very good. But we'll see what the French have to offer now.
Here we are, on the way up to the Col des Autans, which is over there, the highest point of the walk. Apparently there's a big scary ladder, which is quite high, and then you have to squeeze through a little gap at the top. But we've got small backpacks, so we should be all right. It's supposed to be 2 hours from the hut where we left to the col, and then once we step off the col, we will be in France.
We started our day's walk high in the mountains at an altitude of around 2,000 metres, and we made good progress towards the Col des Autans. The high mountain scenery was spectacular, and the route towards the col was uneventful, apart from one minor mistake.
So, we're still not at the Col des Autans, but that's okay. We followed the trail markers, and then after about 10 minutes, we kind of looked like we were walking in the opposite direction to where we thought we were going, so we had a look at the map, and then we were off our official route. So what we think has happened is that the official route with the map we've got is like 4 years old or something, and there was a landslide and it's been blocked off, and now there's a kind of detour that goes round, which is the official part of the trail. But but what it means in practice is that we've walked like 15 minutes up a big hill and then 15 minutes back down for no reason. But I think we're going the right way now. At least now we can.
As the col approached, we started to remember that this was known as the most difficult and scary part of the Tour de Dent Blanches. At this point, we weren't too worried though.
And then there's just that one ladder at the end.
But as we made our way up towards the infamous ladders of the Col des Autans, the going got tougher and tougher. Various ropes and chains were provided to stop us from falling off the mountain, but the last part of the climb consisted of some metal bars hammered into a vertical rock face. And although we made it to the top unscathed, it was a lot scarier and tougher than we had imagined.
So we've just come up the famous Col des Autans ladders. It was a lot scarier than I thought it would be. There's a lot of chains and ropes and then ladders, but the first part was not too bad, but the steps you have to take are huge. So, and they're tiny little footholds. There's a rope and chain to hold on to, but if you don't use your arms a lot, you're going to fall off. I wasn't too bad until I got to the bottom of the main ladder, but then the bottom rung of the ladder was hanging off loose, which didn't inspire me with confidence for the rest of the ladder. So at that point I was like, oh my god, it's miles to the top. And so to get around the broken step, you have to step on a tiny little piece of rock about this big. Once you get on the main ladders, it wasn't too bad. And then the main ladders are okay because they're just like climbing a normal ladder, but then you have to do a sideways shimmy over a vertical drop to get on the next one. My god.
Now that the scary part of the day was over, we relaxed and started to enjoy the scenery again. We were high up in the mountains on the border between Switzerland and France, and with less than 5 kilometres to go to reach our destination for the night, we enjoyed a leisurely lunch. Soon, though, it was time to get going again, and we set off on our descent to the refuge de Vajal, where we would be spending the night.
Here we are on the Col de Sajarou, 2395 metres. We are heading to the refuge Vajal, which is an hour that way. Down below us is Bout du Monde, the end of the world. There's a helicopter over there.
The way down was a lot less stressful than the way up, and we enjoyed a gentle stroll through sheep-filled rocky slopes as we made our way back down to lower altitudes. Soon, the flowers were appearing again, and we reached the Tête de Perua at 2285 metres, about halfway down to the refuge. The refuge de Vajal is at an altitude of 1900 metres, and as we neared the refuge, the terrain got grassier and grassier. Soon, the refuge was in sight. Finally, after a dramatic day, we arrived. It was the morning of day 3, and the hut was a hive of activity. Once again, we were the last walkers to leave the hut.
Okay, here we are, halfway up the Col de Champery. We've just had a night in the refuge de Vogel, if you want to be English about it, or Vajel.
Vajel.
It was pretty nice. It's a very modern place. It's actually fairly peaceful. Still very hot at night, hard to sleep in the heat, but what can you do? I don't know. All the windows were wide open. Dinner was very good. Dinner was an improvement on the Swiss dinner. Not meaning to cast aspersions, but I checked in with our Dutch friends who we were eating with, and they said that Italy has the best food and Switzerland has the worst. I'm not taking responsibility for that comment. It was merely passed on by the more experienced hut dwellers, but it was a nice meal. Yeah, it really gives you the scale, doesn't it?
Our walk on day 3 was, in theory, of a similar style to the walk of the previous day. A steep uphill climb into the high mountain area, followed by a gradual descent towards our hut for the night.
Yeah.
But then something like, what is it?
The first part of the day was fairly straightforward, with an easy trail that wound its way slowly uphill through grassy meadows. Once again the sun was shining, and once again we were grateful for our good luck with the weather. As on the previous day, as we approached the higher altitudes, the terrain became more rocky and difficult. At this stage, though, there was nothing too serious, and we continued at a relaxed pace whilst enjoying the spectacular mountain scenery. It took us around 2 hours to reach the day's highest point, the Col de Champery, at 2338 metres altitude.
Isn't it?
I think this is right, yeah.
Once over the col, the trail mostly disappeared, and we picked our way carefully over loose rocks, trying to find the best way through.
I can't get a kind of more diagonal angle.
We were now starting to get hungry, but as there weren't many suitable spots to eat, we pressed onwards in search of a flat, shady area where we could enjoy the full benefit of eating our packed lunch in the comfort that we deserved.
It's day 3 and we've come from Refuge de la Vogelle and we're going to the Folly. We've had our lunch and it was very good. Couscous salad, no less. It was a long uphill, quite steep, some tricky bits, and then down through a whole load of rubble and rocks to get to this kind of what we think must be an old lake bed, but the proper lake is down there.
After a short climb, we found ourselves in a long rocky valley, which was quite spectacular and deathly quiet. There were a few strange shaped giant blocks of icy snow remaining after the summer melt, and pretty much no marked trail to speak of.
Yeah, we stayed low. We couldn't get into the hut for a coffee.
At the end of this valley was a lake. This is where we found all the other walkers.
It's the lowlands.
After the lake, we continued downhill towards our destination for the night, the Refuge de Folly. This refuge was at 1550 metres altitude, our lowest point since the first day. The location of the hut was excellent, with great views out over the valley, and there were many people out on the terrace enjoying the sunset.
So we've just left the Refuge de Folly above Samoëns, and the route for us is 4 hours 10 uphill to the Col de Bostan. So this is the day of hell when we might collapse and die and not make it. So we have to try. So we reckon if we do it in 5 hours, then we're doing well. So it's 8:45, and we reckon if we're there by 2, then we're going well.
Today was our biggest day since day 1. We needed to gain 1,000 metres of altitude.
Okay, so here we are, half an hour in to what Tom describes as the day from hell, otherwise known as just a gentle uphill walk. We're half an hour in, and so far no dramas, so I think, you know, we're on the times, but at the moment we're 30 minutes for 30 minutes, so we're unstoppable.
As we made our way slowly uphill, we kept an eye out for direction signs. Not because we didn't know the way, but because we wanted to track our progress against the official timings. Over the last couple of days, we had found ourselves taking longer than it officially should have done according to the signposts. Of course, we blamed our filmmaking for this slowness and not our age.
What's the score?
What have we here?
It's the day of the Col de Hell, but actually it's not working out that bad. So we're supposed to go uphill for 4 hours and 10 minutes to the Col de Bostan at 2,400 meters, we think. We've probably done the majority of the climbing, so we should only have to go up another 200 meters. And we're a little bit ahead of schedule, which is rare.
What we didn't realise at this point was that the Col de Bostan was not actually the highest point of the day's walk at all, and in fact we would need to cross over the Pass au Taureau, which was over 250 metres higher than the Col de Bostan. Ignorance is bliss, though, as they say, and we continued onwards and upwards.
Here we are at the top of the mountain. We reckon there's an hour to go to the 4-hour 10 mark, which we're timing ourselves against. There hasn't been another timing sign for a while, so we don't know if we're on track or not. We have had to stop for oak bars, very important. Okay, now we really know where we are. We're at the Col de Pointe d'Oie. It's at 2475 meters. Not the highest point, but getting close to it. We should be 3 hours 5 into it. We're 3 hours 3 into it. So far it's going pretty well. We're 3/4 of the way through. We're not too tired. A bit disappointing that the mist has come in because it's quite hard to see anything. But you know, the lunar landscape is pretty good. So it's onwards and upwards.
Now that we were at 2,500 meters of altitude, the walking was getting tougher and rockier. Unfortunately, it was also the first time so far that there were clear blue skies and sunshine.
This bit's really hard. It's very slippery, loads of scree, loads of fog coming in everywhere. This bit of the trail is probably not what I would call a relaxing, scenic, enjoying part of the trail. Partly because the cloud is here, but partly because paranoid about sliding down the hill and scraping yourself up.
Abruptly, we arrived at the Passo Toro and we found ourselves on a very narrow ridge with a vertical drop down the other side. Once again, we were surprised by the sudden difficulty of the terrain, and it was back to holding on to chains for support and slipping down loose scree and gravel.
So we just come down from the Pas de Toro, was it called, or something like that? And it was a nightmare. My day of hell was truly bad. We got to the top on slippy, gravelly, pretty dangerous slopes. If you slipped, you might fall all the way down. And then over the top, there's all these chains to try and get yourself down. And then when you get down through this really narrow passage, then there's this long, gravelly slopes, with the gravel slipping. I think I fell over once. If you really lost it, you'd tumble down and probably die. So we're glad to be the other side of that.
On our way down the steep slope, we had attempted to eat our packed lunch, but ended up aborting the stop after we saw a scary landslide of big rocks nearby. Packed lunches were provided by the mountain huts each morning, and every day we looked forward to seeing what was in them. We were, of course, also devising a complicated assessment system to determine which hut's lunch was the best. So once we were safely at the bottom, we tried again and enjoyed our lunch in a much more relaxing setting before we continued through the high mountains until we finally reached the Col de Bostan.
It's Col de Bostan. Here we are at the Col de Bostan. Tom's day of hell is officially over, apart from an hour's walk down there. So it's gone pretty well. We got to here earlier than we thought. It didn't take as long as we thought. It wasn't as hard physically as we thought, but it was a bit more dicey terrain than we thought. So in theory now we should have a gentle stroll of an hour and 10 down to the Refuge de Bostan, where we'll stay the night, and then we're on the home straight, the final day.
Despite the difficulties of the Passo Toro, it had not quite been the day of hell that was predicted, and we arrived at the Refuge de Bostan with plenty of time to settle in.
Here we are in a typical dormitory room. There's 7 beds in this one. The last 3 places have had multiple rooms with between 3 and 10 beds in. It's been quiet, so there's only 2 other people in our dormitory, and they're sleeping over there. You can see they're pretty comfortable, quite small beds. Very bad for Dutch people who've got too long legs because they're really short.
The Refuge de Bostan sits at 1763 metres altitude, and it was actually not the first time that we had been here, as on a previous walking trip we had popped in for a hot chocolate on a cold, cloudy afternoon. At that time it was totally deserted, and so had a completely different atmosphere to how it felt now with the fine weather and happy walkers. And on this visit, of course, we also stayed the night, where once again we were treated to a beautiful sunset over the mountains.
It's the last day today, day 5. Today is supposed to be an easy day. We've just left the hut, Bostan. Pretty samey as the other ones, pretty nice, not too bad. A bit more chaotic and disorganised, I have to say, but they did have eggs for breakfast. In theory, we're going to go uphill a little bit. We're going to cross the border back into Switzerland, and then we should have a clear run down all the way back to Champery, where we will finish the walk.
On our final day of walking, we had to cover the greatest distance of any day so far, around 19 kilometres. But it was mostly downhill, it was easy terrain, there was a coffee and cake stop available, and we were finishing the day in a fancy hotel in Champery. Yes, what more could we possibly want?
Red sky at night, so there's the light. Yeah.
It wasn't long before we were on the final approach to cross the border back into Switzerland. And after a bit of an uphill slog, we arrived at the Col de Creux, which was on the border and was also the highest point of the day's walk at 1920 metres altitude.
So we've just arrived in Switzerland, day 5, back in Switzerland. We're on the home straight. We've just come across the col up there, which marks the border between Switzerland and France. There used to be even an old customs house on there, which they're going to turn into a cafe and refuge, but you have to wait till 2024 if you want a coffee, so that's no good for us. It's at about 1900 metres. We think now the uphill is all over, so we slogged uphill for about 2 hours and got to there, and it's really crowded because it's a Saturday full of mountain bikers and people and whatever else again. We're on the home straight, gently along the contours down to Champery, where we will finish the walk. So, you know, unless we get struck by lightning or some other disaster, we should be making the end of this walk.
Once we had crossed the border, it really was plain sailing. There were no more rocky high mountain areas and no more chains or ropes. In fact, much of the trail consisted of easy paths along ridges and wide gravel tracks. We had a relaxing day and made good progress. As we descended, we started to think about the 4 mountain huts that we had stayed in during our walk, and we decided to give out some awards relating to the quality of these huts. At the top, with 3 awards, came the Refuge de Folie, picking up Best Packed Lunch, Best Dessert and Best View. Next up, with 2 awards, the Refuge de Vajal, Best Overall Refuge and also Best Dinner. And finally, bringing up the rear with 1 award each, the Refuge de Bostan with Best Breakfast and the Refuge de Sustenance with Best Souvenirs. Only a few hundred metres from where we first joined the Dent Blanches trail 5 days ago, we arrived at the Cantine de Barmas. It felt very crowded after our time up in the high mountains, so we moved on to the nearby Cantine de Dent Blanches and had our coffee there. Coffee over, all that was left for us to do was to walk back down the same track to Champery that we first came up on 5 days earlier.
We're back at the bus shelter.
Here we are, yep.
We've been up, we've been round, we were down. So we're on the way down to Champery, probably an hour from here. It was doable, very doable, but there was a little bit of risk to life, which was a bit, But apart from that, it was fine. I recommend it to anybody.
As we reached the edge of Champery, we found an alternative route to the centre via a nice trail through the forest.
Here we are in the suburbs of Champery, which means we're pretty much finished.
Finally, after 57 kilometres of trails, 6,000 metres of vertical ascent, and many more ropes, ladders and chains than we anticipated, we made it. to the end.